So most of the time when I'm dealing with images, especially with images taken from my phone camera, the images are oriented correctly and then they render correctly on the web. But sometimes if you're holding your phone in a non-standard orientation, the photo can get saved with a non-standard orientation. So for example, if I click on this bench photo, what you can see is that behind the scenes, even though this photo looked fine on my phone, it's actually rotated 90 degrees counterclockwise when I render it on the web. So ideally what I'd like to do is rotate the image such that it is correctly oriented on the web. And I can do that using GraphicsMagick's Auto-Orient feature. So let's take a quick look at how this works. So the first thing that we want to do is actually determine whether or not the image needs to be rotated, because messing with a JPEG image is almost never a lossless operation, meaning that the very act of rotating and then resaving the image is almost certainly going to result in some data loss. And in fact, if we look at this demo here going from the counterclockwise rotation to the natural rotation, we can see that the file size dropped from 576K to 223K, and that's because the save operation in the convert uses a default quality of 75% in GraphicsMagick. So we just have to be mindful of that. We don't want to have to do it all the time. So for these other images that don't require rotation, we want to leave those files as is, and you can see here we maintain the file size across the operation. Well, in this case there actually is no operation to be had. So jumping back into the code, again, the first thing we want to do is identify whether or not the image has to be rotated, and we can use GraphicsMagick's identify command to read metadata out of the image, and in this case we're going to use the format operation to format or to determine which string will be returned containing which information. In this case we want to read the EXIF tag for orientation. That's going to return a number, or a number as a string if that orientation header exists, or it's going to return the empty string if it doesn't exist. So we can trim that value, use the val command to coalesce it into a number, or a 0 if it's an empty string, which means that our input orientation here will either be 0 or one of the expected EXIF orientation readings. In this case, if we jump back here to this bench, you can see that we get a 6, which means that it's 90 degrees and mirrored. I don't necessarily understand how all of this works, if this is applying to the image or to the camera orientation itself, but let's just say that it exists. And the more important thing is that GraphicsMagick understands it and can understand how to apply the auto-orientation. So if the input orientation is 0, meaning it doesn't exist, or it's 1, meaning it's normal, in that case we're just going to copy the file to the current demo directory as is, and that's going to be the image that we apply on the right. However, if the orientation indicates a non-standard rotation, then we're going to use the convert command to apply the auto-orient operation. And again, that tells GraphicsMagick to look at the metadata for the image, pick out this orientation behind the scenes, rotate the image such that it's the correct side up, and then we're going to save that image out to our current demo directory. Now, I'm also including the strip operation, which is just going to remove all the metadata from the image, which again will remove data that we don't necessarily need for the web, trying to reduce the file size. Now I have here commented out quality of 75 to demonstrate again that the JPEG image manipulation is almost always a lossy operation, and in fact GraphicsMagick is using a 75% by default. So actually let's go back to the image. So first, right, we have 223K, and in fact if I uncomment out the quality of 75 and I rerun this, you'll see that we also get 223K. So it's using that default value of 75%. Now if we jack this up to like 85% and rerun this, you'll see we go from 223K to 300K. So clearly we're dealing with a lossy operation with the auto-orient, which is again why we want to only run the auto-orient if we've been able to determine that the image actually requires orientation based on the EXIF tag if it exists within the image. And then the rest of this is just some boilerplate here, or some low-level GraphicsMagick stuff, and you can see that we're outputting the input image next to the output image, and that's what we're getting here, the before and after of the auto-orient. So, when you're dealing with user-generated content, user-provided content, there's always a really fine line around how much you want to do programmatically, because you have to assume that the user understands the trade-offs, especially a designer understands the trade-offs of things like file size and compression and quality, because they're making that decision when they export their images, right? They're clearly not exporting, a 40 megabyte image at 100% quality, right? They choose something like 65%, 85%, depending on the design tool. And it becomes dangerous as a service provider to step in and say, actually, you don't want 85%. We're going to, lower that quality down to 70% in order to reduce file size, right? We can't necessarily always make those decisions on behalf of the user. But something like the auto orientation of a photo that's taken on a phone, that does feel like a use case where we can actually step in and say, I think what you probably wanted was the image to be rotated and to be the correct side up. So maybe there is some opportunity there to step in and do something programmatically. And it's nice to see that GraphicsMagick makes that super easy with the auto-oriented feature. And then we can, of course, leverage that quite seamlessly in our Lucee CFML code.